Dr. Daniel Buser is one of the most experienced international implant surgeons with 35 years of surgical experience. He widely lectures at national and international conferences and CE courses to share his knowledge. He has served as professor of oral surgery at the University of Bern, Switzerland, and as president of various academic associations. He has received several scientific awards, and with his team, he has authored and co-authored more than 400 publications, book chapters on translational research in the field of implant dentistry. Today, he works part-time in a private center for implantology to surgically treat implant patients. His main activity now is continuing education. With his friend Tony Scullion, he has established the Buser and Scullion Academy of Periodontology and Implant Dentistry. Dr. Buser, we welcome you.
Thank you so much for the invitation to come to this meeting. I remember very well my first lecture at an AO Congress. It was in Boston, 1991, very small. And the topic was submerged versus non-submerged healing modality. Heated debate. Some of them wanted to kill me because I said we don't need to submerge in all cases. Now today I talk about the evolution of dental implants, and I give you a Swiss perspective. And of course, I'm not talking for whole Switzerland because we have 4 dental schools. I probably present mainly the perspective of the University of Bern. And of course, also, as you will just see in a moment, then also the ITI, because it originated with a professor from the University of Bern, Professor André Schröder. Give you greetings from beautiful Switzerland, small country. You see, just 8 million people. This is almost smaller than Los Angeles, I guess, but very cozy, 800 plus years, and not far away, 1 hour to go to these fantastic Alps. You see, to see these mountains, almost 4,000 meters and some more. Last year, I had a big change in my life because I left university after 40 years of service and went into a small clinic where I continued to treat patients on a much smaller scale, and as we have heard, you see, decided to do main activity in knowledge sharing. And today with the streaming technology, of course, this is possible now on a global level, and I love to do that because I want to talk primarily to the young generation. We also learned social media. When I was at Harvard in my sabbatical, that's 6 years ago, that's hard to believe. I learned a lot from the postdocs of Herman Gallucci, and we established then when the pandemic came that we should use it more often. And you see Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, very active groups. If you want to be part of that, you just try to find us. It's not so difficult, and we have there more than 13,000 followers now, and this is growing every week by 200-300 in the moment. With that one, I go into my topics. We're going to start with 50 years ago when it all began, and also a few basic principles. And then progress over the years, so I go decade by decade, then current trends and one major problem. We heard already about it by your Thorsten Jemt, and then a short conclusions. And when we start with the first one, then of course we have to give credit incredibly to these two men, you see. Today we hear a lot about translational research, the collaboration of industry and the scientific side, and these two, they started in 1972 to do that, and they did it then for 16 years until then Fritz Straumann passed away, you see. Because André Schröder was professor in Bern, and he wanted to have dental implants for an animal study to test dental implants in monkeys. And he went to Straumann, who was a medical device company, big one, later than part of Synthes. Today this company actually was bought by Johnson & Johnson. And they started to do this animal study, and that was the sensation at that time. They could show for the first time osseointegration with histological pictures. You see, these were the prototypes of first-generation implants by Straumann in the 1970s. hollow baskets, solid screws, a TPS screw it's called, and they treated those implants. They used them in edentulous mandibular cases, but also in this animal study. And this is the paper that really was a sensation at that time, because they had the technique to show non-decalcified section with the bone and the titanium in one piece. And this is the first histologic proof of osseointegration, what has been described, of course, by P.A. Bronnemark in his landmark paper a few years earlier. So that was a big contribution by André Schröder. Then what they also did, you see, and this is the original paper, they said if you want to make progress, we have to establish a group together to exchange our experience and to talk to industry, and this is was the foundation of the ITI. They established ITI in February 1980. Today, ITI is the largest implant association on the globe, more than 20,000 members. I think on the internet, on their program, they have another 45,000 using all these lectures they can learn from these platforms. So this is actually excellent move when they did that. Only 12 people. See, it was a copy of a similar group called ASIF in the orthopedic field, because this was a group they started 10 years earlier to treat fractures with these plates. And Fritz Stramann from the industrial side said, why don't we do exactly the same? André Schröder became the first president. And you see, 8 years later, they said we also need money for research, so they established an ITI foundation. And today, the foundation has provided more than 50 million Swiss francs for research accessible for everybody. Very competitive, of course, but it's not related to any collaboration, let's say relationship with Straumann as a company, because it's an ITI foundation. You can read there, you see what Fritz Stramann said, you see the independent research is so important to make progress, so paid consultants, that is not good when you try to develop these things, you see. And these two people made that in 1980, and it's like irony, you see, 4 days after signature with a lawyer, Fritz Stramann passed away with a heart attack, and that's like the legacy now that we have. So that was the two people thing, you see. Then in the mid-80s, I actually joined the group, and then we said we have to get rid of these one-piece implants, TPS surface all the way up, because we have seen a lot of infections around these implants, and then in 86, these first two-piece implants have been developed, and it was a strong wish we wanted to have in the neck area a machined surface, or the Bronnemark surface, and the Straumann surface further down inside the bone. Today we call that a hybrid design implant, and I will come back to that in full detail then towards the end of my lecture. Okay, when we summarize, you see, conclusions from these early 20 years, they established this collaboration, they established an association, later a foundation, and they used from the beginning the fundamental principles of translational research and evidence-based developments and treatment protocols. And I always say, you see, when I joined the group in 85, 86, I grew up as a young academician with these principles. And of course, you soak it up, and they served me extremely well, as I will then summarize at the end in my conclusion again. Good. Now, what has been the progress over the years? When we look at the 1990s, we have had two major developments. One was on the implant surface. We have seen a paradigm shift from a machine surface, the Bronnemark surface, to the micro rough surface. TPS was a rough surface, not a micro rough surface. And second, of course, the development of GBR to actually regenerate bony defects in the alveolar ridge or around the implants. In both developments, University of Bern played a leading role, and of course it was very nice. In addition, we have seen some trends that we shifted more and more to partially edentulous patients. We have heard that from Thorsten Jemdt as well. In Bern, the fully edentulous patients are today below 5% for many, many years. They are actually fading out. We also have seen in the second half of the decade that aesthetic implant dentistry became more and more important. So we started to talk about aesthetics. From a surgical point of view, another bone grafting procedure became routine, that sinus floor elevation, to overcome the problems in the posterior maxilla, which has been often a really big problem for the patients. So let us start with the surface. Here you see all the implants we had in the 1960s and 70s. You see in Germany, of course, the Bronnemark implant. Ledermann was a TPS surface. Kirsch, IMZ, you might remember those, completely gone. And then, of course, the second generation implants of Straumann, as you see on the right side. So, important, you see, these are the implants that had already at that time these two implant surface characteristics. And in 1993, then Dennis Tarnow came up with the term hybrid design implant. This is a position paper of another study where he said the future should be like this because we need a machine surface close to the crest to eliminate the risk that plaque accumulation or biofilm attachment could cause a problem. We did in the 1990s landmark studies. Actually, the first one on the left side I analyzed together with Joe Firolini during my Harvard stay, 89 through 91. This is the best cited paper we have with almost 1,500 citations because that study changed the whole market to the micro-rough surfaces. You see, then we also did a removal talk study together with Dave Cochran. And then the market really changed. We have seen higher bone-to-implant contacts with these micro-rough surfaces. One was the best DSLA, it was called, and we have seen higher removal torque values. So we figured out actually much stronger bonding or anchorage in the bone and much faster. So then we were able to shorten the healing periods. Actually, we cut them in half. End of the 90s, we proposed 6 weeks of healing and tested that in a big clinical study. So it offered significant advantages, and we heard from Thorsten Jemdt. He showed this beautiful graph. You see that when they switched over from machine surface to the micro-rough surface, that they reduced significantly the early failure rate, because I've seen that paper before. So we have had much lower early failure rates, much better success rates in the maxilla. Another one is no need for bicortical stabilization, much shorter implants, because I remember the days I've seen that they told you, if possible, in the maxilla, 80 millimeter long implants, bicortical, to make sure that the implants are holding. So the use of shorter implants, of course, is a huge advantage. Okay. Now today, most of the implants have the micro-rough surface, but most of them, they have the micro-rough surface all the way up. They are non-hybrid design implants because they don't have a machine surface in the crestal area. A few of them are hybrid design, most prominent the tissue-level implant of Straumann, because it was always a hybrid design implant since its inception in 1986. Here you see modern implants, you see, as we all know them, from the major implant companies. On the left side, you see the tissue-level implant, and then you see all the other ones. And you see in the middle this implant that was initiated by Dennis Tarnow with Triple I, with the hybrid OsseoTite. The other one was GBR, and I want to refer to the 30 years of guided bone regeneration just coming out. It's the first congress probably where you can see it on the bookshelf, at least I hope. I will go there and have a look. And you see excellent authors, all master clinicians, including Istvan Urban and Sasha Jovanovic and Frank Schwartz and so on and so on. For GBR, we have 30 years plus of experience, and the first 10 years was the so-called development phase of the 1990s. And I want to show you how this was triggered. You see, the study, or let's say the development, again, was initiated by preclinical studies, or animal studies coming out of Gothenburg. The Dahlin and Newman papers, also Nyman, Sture Nyman, 1988, 389, 1990. Then we had one from Bern, and also first clinical case reports were published. First one was Rich-Losara, 1989. We all know the principle, the membrane is a barrier to exclude the soft tissue cells, so the bone-forming cells, the blood vessels with the bone-forming cells, the pericytes have access to this bony defect. I want to show here also a picture of Bob Schenk, because Bob Schenk was my second mentor besides André Schröder, and he made the biggest impact because we have learned so much from Bob Schenk. He was a world-famous bone physiologist in the orthopedic field. They have all known him, and he retired. And as young emeritus, I asked him if we could continue a collaboration, and then finally ended up in a lab in the dental school and did then another 15 years of active research with us. I think we published more than 40 papers with him as a co-author. Also, this is the first one in HOMI that actually taught us how bone is healing, because we have seen the bone heals in maturation steps, heals from the bony walls, was a study without bone fillers, and we could easily see, you see the woven bone formation and then the remodeling phase, and that it takes time. And we could also see that even the defects could not completely regenerate in 4 months because they were simply too large. So it was a very nice contribution by Bob Schenk. Actually, the GBR book is dedicated to Bob Schenk, just to acknowledge the important role he had. When we had 5 years of experience with Gore-Tex membranes, we had a meeting in Arizona to discuss the problems we had. Tendency of collapses, you see, difficult handling, soft tissue decencies. You see here Sasha Jovanovic and Massimo Simi and myself with our senior friend at that time, and always part of the gang, Bill Becker from Tucson. We had 2 main conclusions. We have to learn more about appropriate bone fillers and to support the membrane and to see if they can speed up the bone healing. And the second one, we should search for alternative membranes to get rid of Gore-Tex, because that always required a second open flap procedure, and that, of course, is not really good for the patient. So we initiated in 1994 in Bern then our research on bone fillers, and we have done 8 studies, 25 years of experience published in the best journals, and we learned a lot. And in the beginning, Bob Schenk again was the guy who told us how it works. And we learned beautifully. See, I show you 2 studies, not mine, but that's by Simon Jensen from Copenhagen, who was a visiting researcher. And we have seen very quickly from these studies, the bone fillers and bone grafts have 2 characteristics that are relevant for us. One is the osteogenic potential, and the other one is the volume stability or the substitution rate. So when we looked at these studies, all of them showed the same, that autogenous bone speeds up the bone formation as single one, and nothing comes close to it. But we have also seen that these autogenous bone chips resorb very quickly. Whereas we have found then the bovine-derived DBBM material, you see, has no osteogenic potential, but it has excellent low substitution rate. That means good chances for volume stability. So we made the conclusion it's good to combine these 2, and today all the leading GBR surgeons are using actually a so-called composite graft. So autogenous bone chips combined with a second filler, often DBBM or BIOS. I want to mention it at least once. Here you see the histology. No, we are not moving. Here you see the 2 characteristics we have. And when we go in a high magnification on the left side, this is a 2-week specimen. So in these animals, 5 millimeter defects, they were completely bridged with woven bone at 2 weeks when we had their autogenous chips. And you see the chips are fully embedded in this woven bone. Bob Schenk always said that Growth factors must play a role here because the larger the surface, the more contact to growth factors, and that actually triggers the osteoblastic activity. So that's how we learned in these preclinical studies, and then of course we started to implement that in daily practice. The cortex membrane, you see, was studied the alternatives because we had a lot of problems, and here I want to give credit to Mark Hürzeler because he did a groundbreaking study. That was then, he was actually in Texas to do that. I saw this study in '95 at a big meeting in Toronto, and the results are very compelling. And then when I went home to Switzerland, I said, you see, it's time that we start to check collagen membranes. And we did also an animal study with Phonax, but actually Mark Hürzeler was the first one to really do this. Okay, so that's how we do these procedures. Since then, '98 was the first case in the aesthetic zone. We call this contour augmentation with a 2-layer composite graft. And you see actually on the right side, you see the first case we treated like this. And you see it's a tissue level implant, as we always place these implants with the rough surface, the micro rough surface below the crest, at least 1 millimeter, to compensate for some remodeling activities. And then we augmented this to the rim of the implant shoulder in this case, because it's a tissue level. And then a primary closure. At that time, 3 months of healing. Today, it's 2 months. And you see the same patient 20 years later. This is 2018. I'm going to see this lady next year for 25 years follow-up. You see the excellent stability around this tissue-level implant, and you see the buccal bone wall is fully regenerated and maintained over time. Very typical for this hybrid design implant. Okay, so when we summarize, you see, in this decade, we have seen major progress, most significant, the paradigm shift with the surfaces, and of course the GBR, because the GBR also laid the basis for much better aesthetic outcomes in the partially edentulous patients. Good. Now comes the past 20 years. So I took 2010, 2020 together. And you see, we have seen additional major developments. And I would say most significant as a surgeon that we had cone beam CT available. So a much better three-dimensional radiographic imaging technique. And together, of course, then with the oral scanners, you see, the basis for digital technology or digital workflow. So you need both the DICOM file, the STL file, and of course then the software to do the planning, and then the printing, and so on and so on. So that is something which is extremely interesting. During my sabbatical with Hermann Galucci in 2016, I could pick up a lot. I brought it back home, and then we actually intensified our activities since then, the late 2016. Second point, much better understanding on tissue biology in post-extraction sites. These rich alterations. Araujo, I'll show you. Much better understanding on bone grafts and bone substitutes, because we followed further up and went into cell culture studies in vitro. And we had also then, of course, clearly defined selection criteria for post-extraction implant placement. These were more results of consensus conferences. As a result, we have much better treatment outcomes, especially in the aesthetic zone, reduced risk, we have reduced invasiveness and morbidity for patients, and we have much shorter healing periods. Then, since 2010, we have seen a tremendous amount of long-term studies, and I would say 10 years can be called long-term, and I will show you, let's say, a nice selection of them. So this is the cone beam, a revolution in 3D radiology, much more precise examination of the local anatomy. Based on that one, we make a lot of decisions with selection criteria, absolutely necessary for digital workflow. And of course, and I loved it, you see, it's an excellent research tool to analyze patient pools, to learn, because it's not invasive. So cone beam, tremendous. Then this is this best cited paper in the dental literature, I would speculate. I think 120 citations per year. that shows the impact this paper had, Araujo and Linde. I saw it the first time 2004 at an ITI annual meeting, and I immediately realized why we see these different behaviors in patients. You see here in, of course, dog, the animal model, the beagle dog, premolars in the mandible. You let them heal 2 months, and you see the buccal wall always reduces because that's normally a thin buccal wall. And they came up with bundle bone resorption. As we all know, Jan Linde, of course, very delicate, excellent teacher. And Maurizio made his career with a series of studies, and that's the most important one. Okay. We've picked it up and used a cone beam to analyze the significance in the aesthetic zone. That's a paper we published actually with Will Ginobili in Journal of Dental Research, and also very good citation, so 50 citations a year, because we could show when the buccal wall is more than 1 millimeter, then it's more or less stable, about 1 millimeter bone loss. But when it's thin, and it's normally thin, 0.5 millimeter, 0.67 or so, then you can lose up to 100%, and this is on average, the median, you see that 7.5 millimeter. This has a huge impact on your clinical practice because that can really give you then a lot of troubles in your patients. We analyzed then also how often is it then thin or thick again, a cone beam study with Vedrana Braut, an ITI scholar, and we have seen, unfortunately, between canine to canine, it's less than 10% actually thick. The thin phenotype dominates, or no bone, because it's already resorbed. And that was also in Brazil like this, in the United States, Chapel Hill, the paper by Vera, also in Hong Kong, where Klaus Lang has been at that time, and they showed all the same. So we see a lot of resorption. We picked up again the research on bone grafts, and what Bob Schenk told us, it must have to be done with growth factors. You have to go into cell culture research. We established in Bern a lab for oral tissue culturing, you see, and we brought Reinhard Gruber to Bern, and we did a series of studies, as you can see here. And this is only one of them by Asparo. That's the current Maria. She is the head of this lab for 4 years now. She's a cell biologist, also by training, also she's a PhD. And that, of course, is tremendous for us because she knows much more about the basics of cell biology than we do because we are clinicians. It was published in the International Journal of Oral Science, and you see when you take bone, and this is from a pig mandible, and you store it either in Ringer solution alone or in a mixture of blood serum and Ringer solution, you can show that rather quickly you see an onset of TGF-beta-1 and BMP2. Actually, they made a paper with Reinhard Gruber. They showed 40 different growth factors, but of course not all of them are relevant for the formation of bone. These are the two really heavy hitters. They're very significant. Here you see these are all original slides from this paper by Asparuova. And I'm not a cell biologist. She always said, you see, this is a strong interplay between TGF-beta-1 in the onset and then BMP2. And TGF-beta-1 is a recruitment and proliferation factor, whereas the other one is a differentiation and mineralization factor. And when you add this, you see, then you activate, of course, the response of the tissues, also of the body. See, we also could show that when you take the blood, the mixed blood, you see where the bone chips were in, and take that blood with the growth factors and add them to a filler like DBBM, you see, all of a sudden these fillers become biologically active. Published in 2 papers by Caballé Serrano, Jordi from Barcelona. He's back in Barcelona now, he's professor in oral surgery in the Barcelona University. So we immediately applied that in our daily practice, and we do that since about 8 years now. That means when the flap is open, we collect the blood. We mix it with Ringer solution, so 50-50, so it's not coagulating. I call it always a bloodbath. And then we go and take with sharp bone scrapers, Hufridi bone scrapers, we take bone chips and store them in this blood mixture. And then we leave it there for 15-20 minutes. We continue our implant bed preparation and so on. And then we go back, take the fluid, and we activate, as you see now, we activate then the second filler. So we have them both fillers with a biologic activity. This is this blood Ringer solution mixture. The implant bed preparation and the implant insertion takes about 15-20 minutes. Then we make an aspiration. In a paper with Reinhard Gruber, we call them bone conditioned medium, BCM. And this BCM is now used to activate the second filler. Free of charge. You don't pay anything. It's Mother Nature. And I would love to go into a competitive study once. See if Harvard is able to run this with BMP2 you buy from the company. What is better? I'm sure the bone chips will perform excellent. So, Bob Schenker always said it's not a good idea to think with a single factor you can influence or mimic Mother Nature. This is multifactorial. This is an interplay over the weeks of healing. So this is how the surgery is done. You have seen 2 layers. Based on the Araujo papers, you see 2004 and 5, you see then we came up in ITI consensus conferences, we had 3 of them, you see the papers, highly cited papers, you see 2004 by Hammerly, 2008 by Chen and by, I think, Weber, if I can read it correctly, and then by Morton and by Gallucci. The last one was in 2018, in Amsterdam. So we combined the placement protocols and the prosthetic protocols. And these are the options you have as a clinician, but you need to have good selection criteria to have the most appropriate treatment modality in a given situation to have the best chances for successful outcomes. I'm very proud for ITI that they made this huge effort, and these papers are all highly cited. You see, the impact to the market has been tremendous. Okay. When you, a day of surgery, you have 3 options as a surgeon, you see. That's on the left side. Of course, you have immediate, early and late placement. I always argue like this. You have an extraction and you place an implant. That's immediate. You have an extraction and you do a spontaneous healing, as you don't do a soccer grafting. This is for early placement 4, 6 or 8 weeks later. Or you have an extraction and do a soccer grafting for alveolar ridge preservation. For each of them, there are indications. There are preferences by the clinician, of course, so the percentage can differ from clinic to clinic. So when we go to the immediate placement, you see I learned that for many years I refused to do it because I've seen so many disaster cases in Bern from other people. Then after my Harvard stay and a visit with see Dennis Tarnow and Stephen Chu, then in 2017 we started based on the selection criteria of ITI, published 2014. And we said a thick buccal wall is mandatory, fully intact but 1 millimeter plus. And then we do it flapless, we do it with computer-guided surgery, and we do an internal grafting, as most of them it's done. So we need a digital workflow. You see on the right side just a typical example. I have done so far only 25 cases in 5 years. That shows this is not 10%. This is between 5 and 10%. I might do it more often in the future, but I also made the experience that often the patients don't want to have it. They ask me, what's the long-term documentation? And they go for the more conservative reason at a case like this. So you see here a case I treated with Samir Abouayash. You see we have seen a nice thick buccal wall, and then we did the digital planning, the surgical stent, and then of course you see I had the stent available and then careful extraction, implant bed preparation. I always check it with a periapical radiograph. The depths, where are we? Because the SLA surface, the micro rough surface, has to go below the crest, that's for sure. And then when everything is fine, then we do the internal grafting. We measure the stability with ISQ. And then normally today, the crown is already prefabricated, CAD-CAM, acrylic. So the prosthodontist comes, puts it in, checks the occlusion, checks the contacts, and that's it. Beautiful approach, beautiful. Patients, of course, walks in and walks out, always with a tooth. I tell him, you see, this is not for eating, this is for smiling the next 2 weeks. Of course, soft tissue heals excellent because there is no change too much. So here you see that we leave this crown in place for 3 months and then we convert it. When radiograph looks good, you'll see here the patient at 18 months. I will see her again in July for 3 years now. And I'm very pleased with this approach so far, but of course I do a very strict selection in the moment. Probably too strict, but we will see. I always want to be on the safe side. Okay, second option is extraction and spontaneous healing. That is the early placement approach, what we have done since 98. Now with the BCM technique, even better results. We just fine-tuned that procedure, but the basic is the same. This is indicated when there is a thin buccal wall or no buccal wall. You need enough bone in the apical area to stabilize the implant. So if you have a cyst there, you cannot do it. So when we have enough crest width, we can expect a 2-wall defect, and this is a very nice approach. You get a spontaneous soft tissue thickening during the 6-8 weeks of soft tissue healing, and that is actually a benefit. Here you see a case with 2 central incisors, which is much more demanding than a single tooth. You see that we also augment in between the 2 implants slightly vertical. We use a larger membrane. We often stabilize the applied bone filler material with Tissil, which is a fibrin sealant of Baxter, because that gives additional stability. Okay, the provisional is normally an Essex retainer because we need absolute stability, so there is no pressure to that surgical site. Now here you see the patient 3 years later, done with her spells. I mean, beautiful. Look the central papilla, look the thickness of the facial wall at these 2 implants, BCM enhanced bone augmentation, and that's what we routinely see these days with early placement. The third one is now extraction and socket grafting. So when we cannot do either immediate or early placement, and there will be other reasons, then we go for socket grafting. And you see the indication more and more for elderly patients. I love this approach in elderly patients because they come off with a single tooth, and then, of course, they have multifactorial medical risk factors. They are sometimes 85, 90 years old, and I don't want to do a bone grafting procedure in these patients. Then actually I do this. Very important to also mention here, this is a paper by Avila Ortiz. You see that you have to differentiate when you do socket grafting if you have a thick buccal wall or a thin buccal wall. Thick wall and socket grafting, 100% maintenance of volume. And when it's thin, then you lose about 2-3 millimeters, and this you have to keep in mind. You see, that's why in the animal study, the reduction, and this is a study by Araujo again in 2009, about 12 volume %. The clinical study by Araujo showed actually on the buccal wall quite significant reduction because it's a thin wall phenotype in the aesthetic zone. So we do that. We have done many cases now in the posterior mandible. First molars, first and second premolar, also second premolar in the maxilla. Now we are moving also to aesthetic sites in elderly patients with that one. So the tooth is very carefully extracted, then we do the socket graft, and then we let it heal. So after 3 months, I take a periapical, everything looks fine, then we take a cone beam and do then the digital workflow to have then the surgical stent available. We always use a tissue level implant. I will use now this new like TLX implant because it has an implant that goes straight up. That is better than the tulip shape. So here you see that patient 18 months later. I will see him again this year, then for 3 years again. And very nice, and I'm very happy with this procedure, and it's increasing. So the percentage of GBR in our patient pool is dropping, mainly because of these socket grafting procedures in non-aesthetic sites. Good. Now, last point in this, past 20 years, this long-term documentation. You see, I had the pleasure to work with Thomas Albrechtsson and Lars Sennerby, and in 2012 we published a paper on crestal bone loss and oral implants, and you see we have given just a whole collection with 3 leading implant companies with the 10-year data and above 95% in all these studies. And when we look at the studies we have in Bern, you see all these long-term studies up. We have 4 of them, 3 with the current implants, 1 actually 20 years with the original TPS implants from the second generation. You see, then you see the success rate with the SLA surface implants is 98+% survival rate. So like I say, I tell my patient, the risk to lose an implant is less than 2%. Very low the prevalence for peri-implantitis. You see, I will show you then a study that documents this. So when we summarize, we made significant progress clinically in daily practice. Of course, CBCT and oral scanners have helped with that. You see, a very important the tissue alteration story that helped us to have much better selection criteria. We also had much better insights into the nature of autologous bone, so that triggered the formation of bone in GBR. And last but not least, the concept of socket grafting for alveolar ridge preservation is an additional option of big clinical value, in particular for elderly patients. Good, last one. I have 5 minutes left, and that should be okay. Huh? So I've written with Hugo De Bruyne and Lars Sennerby a paper in Perio 2000, Modern Implant Dentistry based on osseointegration, Current Trends and Open Questions. So this is a very well-cited paper today. I think 70 last year, which is pretty good. And that shows that people are very interested. I will not go through these points because during that meeting many of these aspects will be discussed. We still try to further simplify the procedures, and a driver, of course, is digital technology. We have to see where we can apply it. Not in every case. I do in about 30% of my cases in the moment, and it will increase over time. But we also have to check the precision of this, because there are nice papers coming out now about this. Then, of course, in the field of bone augmentation, is there a magic bone filler or bone stimulating agent that can do everything? You see, we try to do that for 30 years now, and we could not find one. So I think in the moment, this composite graft is the gold standard for sure. Socket shield is another one. I don't want to address it here. I have not done it. I will not do it. Very interesting technique, but there I would love to see a little bit better selection criteria and also long-term study of decent quality. We have not yet seen these papers in the literature. I want to discuss a big problem, and it was addressed by Thorsten very nicely here. We see a pandemic of peri-implantitis in the field. When you listen to the systematic reviews, or when EFP or AAP are doing an analysis of this. And of course, we know peri-implantitis, this is not a foreign body reaction. I never believed that. I have known Karl Donat very well, but he was a non-clinician. He just once expressed an opinion, and that was it. I believe this has clear reasons, and you see the differences. All these risk factors we know, and the micro-rough surface is one of them. An exposed implant surface. It was addressed by Thorsten very nicely, that in Sweden now they see all of a sudden a higher incidence or the prevalence of peri-implantitis. When you look at these, let's say, 2 recent systematic reviews published here, one with Alberto Monche, I give you a higher magnification of the conclusions, then it seems that the prevalence is between about 10 to 20%. And that's by far too much. It's a time dependent, and of course depending on multiple risk factors, you can have. So this is actually what I think we have to accept realistically, but I think we have to fight it, because we have to stop this. And we have different means to do so. When you look at Dirk's paper comparing 3 leading implant systems, one is a hybrid design system, and the other ones are 2 non-hybrid design systems. The tissue-level implant did always the best. I mean, we cannot ignore the data. It's a Swedish, not a Swiss paper, Swedish paper. So I always said I loved when I saw this paper in Journal of Dental Research. Recently, this paper you have to look at. This is from Belgium, group of the Hugo de Bruyne. Almost 1,500 implants, 10 years follow-up. And actually, this is the opposite what we heard from Thorsten, you see, because they said when there was an early bone loss of more than 0.5 millimeter exposing this micro-rough surface of that implant, and AstraTeco it was, you see, they have seen more than 5-fold higher prevalence of peri-implantitis. Very interesting paper to read. So this is a paper that should be cited often. You see. That means, you see, when you get an exposed micro-rough surface, that's not really good. So the paper from our group was tissue-level implants, SLA surface, always with the SLA inside the bone, you see. We had a failure rate of 1.2% at 10 years and a prevalence of peri-implantitis of 1.8%. That's together 3% problems. So the success rate, 97%. That's not so bad, you see. And I think for us, that is our routine. We see, of course, sometimes infections, but very, very infrequent. So what are the solutions? The solutions are twofold, you see. I think we have to improve our education of clinicians, and we have to work on the implant design. These are the 2 areas where we can interact, you see. We have to reduce the prevalence, and we need a paradigm shift in the markets by using more and more hybrid design implants. They are in the market, but they are not used because people don't understand the value of these implants. See, this is a guest editorial in the Academy News. If you want to read that, there's a second one by Dennis Tarnow, also about hybrid design implants. I think it's most interesting with the literature and so on. And you see that we have these implants on the market, you see. Not only that by Straumann, but you see from III, from Nobel, from Astra, we have them all, you see. Also it's available, and we have to push now hard the industry to really partner with us to push towards that. The majority of implants used are hybrid design implants. If that works, we can reduce the prevalence of peri-implant infections. We also have to stop the nonsense by certain companies that every GP should place implants. This is the worst. The quality of the surgery is most important. So we have to educate those with talent and skills, not only specialists, also GPs who want to learn that. So we need to have a strategy for education and so on. So if we are successful in this collaboration with all stakeholders, then we will all benefit. That is the patient primarily, the dentists, and the implant companies. So with that one, my last slide, you see, I want to conclude. You see, the past 50 years have been extremely interesting and exciting. I was part of it 35 years. See, the basic principles of translational research and evidence-based protocols and products served us extremely well. That's not new, but not all companies follow this principle. That's very important. We have made tremendous progress. The collaboration, in our experience, between University of Bern, ITI, and the dental medtech companies that included Straumann and Geistlich and many others, you see, was very fruitful for both sides. We have to continue. We heard it from Wiltshire Nobileo. See, we can solve only together these kind of problems. You see, we have to team up to stop the pandemic of peri-implantitis, and for that one we have to go for hybrid design implants, and we should improve our implant education based on really smart strategies we define together. With that one, I thank you so much. Greetings from Bern. Thank you.